I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on March 28th, 2024. Call the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, we'd love to have your questions in our chat room. You can join us there in chat, either LinkedIn below me or on YouTube over to the right. If you have questions after the fact, maybe you're listening on the podcast or there on YouTube, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or right there on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Olivia Kerbeam is our host today. Olivia is a workplace advisor with Gallup. Her top five are empathy, relator, positivity, futuristic, and significance. And Olivia, welcome to Call to Coach.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the introduction and for having me today. And I'm really excited to share this episode with Tara Duran, the Director of Talent at the Lawrence Group in St. Louis, Missouri, and to really just dive into their Clifton Strengths journey as an organization. And so, Tyra, welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. And just to really start things off, I would just love for you to introduce yourself and give us a little more discussion around your background and your top five strengths.
Yeah, thanks so much, Olivia. Thanks, Jim. Really excited to be here today. So, I am once again Tyra Duran. I am going on 10 years in people and culture work. I started off thinking that I was going to be an attorney. Um, that was the road that I went down. And, it came from what was that? NCIS, Law and Order.
Mm.
I really wanted to be in the courtroom, fighting the big cases like that. And then I started taking law school courses and realized that it was more paperwork than actual courtroom visits. And I said, okay, this I don't know if I'm on the right path here. What is it that I should be doing? I hit like that weird
Mhm.
stint in between graduating from college and real life hitting.
Mhm.
And so just after conversations with my mother, she was like, you know what, you should think about HR. You like to fight for people, right? So that's what you should look at. And looking into it, I decided to go back and get a dual master's in HR from Webster University here in St. Louis. And I loved it. I knew
Mhm.
first semester, like, this is it. Okay. I want to sit at the table. What I later found out from doing my Clifton Strengths, being an influencer for people.
Mhm.
And so that's how I got into it. Started off with a company called Convergys, being their employee relations intern for about a year and moving into training so I can understand how to train and develop adults.
Mm.
It was a little bit of a pivot from HR, but that was my main focus. I need to understand how the adult workforce works, how to manage adults, how to develop and mentor adults. And
Mhm.
so that training job really helped me with that. And then I went into nonprofit with the Gateway Region YMCA, learning more of the HR operations and administrative side. And then there, I joined a group around engagement. What we call them today is BRGs or ERGs. And that's when I really found my passion to say, okay, I need to be
Mhm.
more in the initiatives type, so a type of work. Um, After staying there for about a year, I became the HR generalist of the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yes.
And it was cool. It was cool. I will not lie to you. That was a fun 3 years of my workforce, but that's when I really learned every other realm of people, benefits,
Mhm.
compensation, overall employee experience. And when I really learned how to be an advocate for employees internally, I started doing DEI work, um,
Mhm.
and understanding how to coach adults really in that role. Concentrics bought Convergys and then they called me back. They said, okay, great. Glad you had the experience and called me back. It was during the COVID,
Mhm.
and it was a great opportunity. I hated to leave the Redbirds, but it was just a great opportunity for me in my career, where I ran a site of about 800 employees in between a few states in St. Louis. There, I was promoted to global DEI manager. And it was an interesting time trying to do DEI work for other countries and other
Mm.
learning the legal system and things around DEI. But I ultimately landed here with the Lawrence Group. That has been a wonderful time since 2022, where I'm the director of talent, doing really everything people and culture, from identifying talent, from talent acquisition, as well as assessing talent. What do we
Mhm.
else and who can we promote in the future? What places can we put them in? DEI, overall employee experience. Um,
Mhm.
Lawrence Group is also a part of a 3 business unit consortium. So we have New and Found, that is the commercial real estate investment side, Lawrence Group that does the design, and then Integrate Construction that does the build. So 3
Mhm.
companies, 1 building, 1 CEO. So doing work across all 3. And if people look it up, if you look up City Foundry is one of our flagship projects that all 3 business units have touched. So doing exciting work. That's why I'm
Mhm.
here. That's how I got introduced to Gallup. And I just can see myself long term continuing to be in the people and culture business. So I'm
Yeah. That's very impressive. And really, when you were going through all these kind of different avenues in your career, how did you kind of lean on your strengths, or which strengths did you lean on the most? And then also, what are your top five?
yeah. So if I can, I'm going to do it backwards.
Perfect.
So my top 5 are futuristic,
Hmm.
relator, command, significance, and strategic. And at the time, I didn't know the language behind that. I just
Hmm.
knew, why am I always wanting to know what my future is going to look like 5 to 10 years? And one of my mentors would tell me, you've got to learn how to live in the moment. You will
Hmm.
achieve something and be like, great, okay, let me start planning for the next thing that's 5 years in advance. And I didn't know why I was doing it. I didn't know why I needed to build a 10-year career plan for myself and strategically think about the moves that I was making, why I decided to be a trainer for that 1 year. Um,
Hmm.
but now, knowing the Gallup Strengths language, I realize that I'm futuristic. I have to solve problems of tomorrow, because the way that my brain operates is today will
Hmm.
be over in 24 hours. So we need to be solving the problems of tomorrow, or I need to be thinking about how to navigate for the future in order to be ready for today. And so that's the one that I really feel like I leaned into throughout my career.
Awesome. And I think we have three of the top five the same, which is really cool. And when did you first then take Clifton Strengths? Because you were kind of working on your strengths throughout your whole career, but you just didn't really have that language around it yet. When was your first introduction into you actually utilizing Gallup using Clifton Strengths?
Yeah, awesome. So I interviewed for this position with our COO, Tim Robottom. And one of the things he was discussing during our interview, he said, hey, have you ever heard of Clifton Strengths? Or, are you a coach, familiar? And I said, huh, not quite familiar. Let me do some research. Let me look this up. And the more I started to deep dive, especially after being hired into the organization, I said, okay, we need to deep dive more. I need to be an
Hmm.
internal coach. We need to have some internal people that act as experts. So
Hmm.
that's how I first became introduced before I even took on the position. Him introducing that to me in the interview phase, and me starting to research that. Even if it didn't end up with me being here now,
Hmm.
after doing my research and looking into Clifton Strengths, I said, okay, this is something that I need to be connected to, and that I need to deep dive into more.
Hmm. And with being certified as really being your first step of really understanding Clifton Strengths, how was that process, and what tools do you feel like you leaned on the most, kind of utilizing it at Lawrence Group? Kind of just talking about your experience of getting certified.
You know what? It is so that experience was so eye-opening for me. I am an in-person type of learner, okay? I
Mhm.
tell people I have what I call squirrel brain. Like I could be okay, focus is somewhere in my top 10, but it is like right there, like
Yeah.
8. And so I told our CFO, and she was like, can you do like the online learning? And I'm like, oh no, I cannot do online learning. I'm gonna lose focus. But honestly, I did the online learning, and not once did I lose
Mhm.
focus because it was that interesting. It was funny because after day one, I had my mother take it.
I did too.
Yeah, so it's like my mother was retiring, so it's like, okay, look, take this, and then by the end of the week, I'll be able to coach you on what this means. But it was a really eye-opening experience. It was enlightening
Mhm.
for me as an individual to know, okay, as I move about my career, this is going to give me the correct language to use to say, am I allowed to think futuristically when I'm in this position? Can I
Mhm.
strategically plan, or do you have me doing a lot of executing? Because 6 of my top 10 are influencing themes, and I really need to be an influencer.
Mhm.
So it really helped enlighten me with that language, and made sure that I was excited when I brought it back to the enterprise.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think one thing you really touched on that is important is being that internal strengths expert for your organization, having someone that they can go to and really streamline and lead these Clifton strengths within the organization. And having your CEO on board also is just amazing, especially when you're going into an organization and that's happening. But I know when we were talking, you were talking about how you're all or nothing with bringing Clifton strengths into your organization. So I'd love to just have you talk through your process of, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do this right. And what bringing Clifton Strengths to the Lawrence Group look like.
Yeah. So Clifton Strengths had been introduced to the Lawrence Group right before the pandemic. So a majority of the company had taken Clifton Strengths tests, or
Mhm.
the assessment, and of course, 2020 happened. So
Mhm.
after doing the research and understanding that I needed to be a Clifton Strengths coach in order to best assist the organization becoming a strengths-based organization,
Mhm.
it was really saying, how do we plan? How do we rev back up, reintroduce it to the organization with intentionality? And that's when I leaned into my strategic. Okay.
Mhm.
It's like, how do we map this out? What is the plan? And we really stuck to a 4-part approach. And that's prep, launch, execute, stabilize. Okay.
Mhm.
Prep, get people excited. Hey, remember Clifton Strengths? We're going to relaunch this across all 3 business units. We're going to relaunch this across the organization in the next couple of months. We started introducing and getting people excited. We did a big relaunch at what we have as our annual retreat. That's all
Mhm.
3 companies, as well as Lawrence Group's network offices. So we have offices in Austin, Florida, New York,
Mhm.
all fly in. And so we have this audience where everybody is there in person. And so we said, look, we're going to do this Clifton Strengths work. We brought in Dr. Peter Dry to do the
Mhm.
motivational discussion and some entry level workshop to what they should expect. And then from there, a week later, everybody got the links. Hey, I already have this group. If you're on this list and you're highlighted, I need your assessment. We sent out assessments, and we made sure that everybody was assessed within the next 30 to 45 days. From there, we started the execution. Set up your one-on-one conversations with me. I had a rule that I introduced to the rest of the organization, and that was, if it's on my calendar, take it.
Mhm.
If it's 1 hour, we'll need 1 hour, take it. And so people were setting up those one-on-ones and having conversation. And even if they had started those one-on-ones pre-pandemic, some of them did some follow-ups to say, okay, I just want a refresher. So once we did
Mhm.
those one-on-ones, we then started introducing it to the teams. Okay. So we
Mhm.
went through like the next 60 days. Okay. Now that we've pretty much got a good grasp on one-on-one conversations, let's start setting up team sessions. We need multiple, at least an hour and a half to kick it off so we can start looking at your teams. Maybe it's not your immediate team of direct reports, maybe it's a leadership teams.
Mhm.
And now we are moving from the execution stage to the stabilization stage, right?
Mhm.
It's ingrained in the organization. We launched something last year called the Leadership Learning Series, in which I'll do any type of middle management training or up and coming leader training. And everything is wrapped around Clifton Strengths. Okay, we're going to talk about recognizing your employees, right? How do you recognize your employees per their Clifton Strengths, right? Because
Hmm.
how I recognize my executor is not going to be how I recognize my influencer or how I recognize my relationship builder. Um, we're engulfing it with strengths and performance reviews. How are we organizing our teams based on their Clifton strengths? So that's the steps that we're in now, and really looking forward to continuing those in 2024.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And just knowing that you have a plan for rolling out Clifton Strengths and not necessarily just winging it within your organization, finding something that works best. And how long of a span of time would you say you've been from when you started, like the relaunch of Clifton Strengths to where you're at now? Just maybe for some of our listeners and who are looking to bring Clifton Strengths to the organization, how long has it been since you kind of had that relaunch?
Yeah, May of last year. May of
Okay.
last year. So we built out a solid 6 to 12 month plan in order to do that. So yeah, that's and it's been really successful.
Have a lot of employees kind of who have been revisiting their bless you. A lot of the
Sorry.
employees you're good, who have been revisiting their Clifton Shanks, have you heard any feedback of, "Wow, like, this has really surprised me," or what has kind of been you said overall successful, but maybe some of the interactions that you've heard from employees on kind of their feedback on how this is going?
It's so funny because it's different. It's different. It just depends
Mhm.
on the group, right? So some coming into it, they say, "Oh, I'm really excited about it." I started this process a couple years ago, and I want to follow up more. And then it's some that are a little hesitant, right? They
Mhm.
say, "This seems horoscope like. I don't know." And then we'll go through the process, and it's like that light bulb that comes on.
Mhm.
So it just depends on which group, which set of employees. You get a different response, depends on who it is for
Mm,
sure.
mm.
Mhm.
Tyra, I want to give you a second as I jump in here. I want to give you a second to get a drink of water. You've done a great job of getting through that, and it's okay.
Thank
It
you.
happens. Yeah, it happens during that. We did have a question. You might know this individual. Javier asked this question of, can you give an example of how you use Clifton Strengths to make decisions when managing or directing employees? And I think you've talked a little bit about how you're doing it from an organizational standpoint, but when you think about it in your own in your own role, in I'm sure you're doing it a lot, but maybe something where you think you're most effective. Has there been
Mhm.
a time or a sometimes, like, for me, I lean into my woo for podcasting. I just do. It just works, right? And I know I can do it over and over and over again. Has there been a for you personally in your time there or in your career, has been a theme that you might or a set of themes that you might lean on?
Absolutely. So for myself, there's sometimes like now I have to go more into my top 10 than my top five.
Mm.
Mhm.
So right there at 6 and 7 are like achiever and focus. And sometimes when I'm having to get out there and help our talent development journalists recruit, okay, I've got to tap into achiever and focus. I've got to dive into some inboxes. Or maybe if I'm in a strategy meeting with my leaders, I need to deep dive into my strategic thinking theme. Or if they're talking about Tyra, what does the talent landscape look 5 to 10 years from now? Okay, let me
Mhm.
start thinking futuristically. It's more of that language, right? Think about the things that you're naturally good at when it comes to coaching managers. And if I'm coaching a manager and say, hey, your person has achiever responsibility as a combination,
Mhm.
and you're expecting them to automatically delegate. Look, you ask them to do it, they feel obligated to do it. Practice that patience and use some language like, hey, I put this on your plate, but you do know that's not immediate, right? I can wait
Mhm.
on that. Or you can pass that to your other team member. You don't necessarily have to do that. Just understanding a person's strengths and knowing that there may be those barriers, right, that come with those strengths. That's the way of just leaning into those people having an understanding of how it works with others and really just
Mhm.
pointing it out. If you have somebody that is a learner, I tell leaders, hey, you have a learner person, they're going to ask a lot of questions. That's one of the things that we implemented in the onboarding process. When an employee is now onboarded, they do a one-on-one session with me in their onboarding. And then their leader gets an email saying, hey, here's your new hires top five. Here are some phrases that resonated with them. So we look at some of those combos that we
Mhm.
went in. And if you're a Clifton Strength coach, you know what I'm talking about, those phrases that come from those two combinations. And then there's a section that says, hey, your person is a relator. You have a team of 15. Don't do a group lunch that's 2 hours long asking this person to meet all 15 of your new people. That is going to give them anxiety. Just instead challenge them to say, hey, over the next 60 days, go out to eat with 2 or 3 people at a time, or reach out to them individually, because relators need that individual relationship. So that's how I usually coach, and manage and direct employees based on those strengths.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's just so helpful that you take into consideration maybe the tenure of where the employees at. Okay, we're onboarding, but also the different relationships they'll have, whether it's coworker to coworker, coworker to manager, and just having that understanding and infusing strengths with that. And Jim, we have another question from Morgan in the chat that I think would be good for Tyra as well. The chat has really great questions. I want to
Yeah,
make sure
do you
they,
want to just read that,
yeah.
Olivia? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Tyra, how do you recommend companies utilize the data from Clifton Strengths when assessing the strengths within teams from a hiring/recruitment standpoint? And do you have any strategies/best practices for addressing gaps within teams?
Ooh, this is so good, because managers, and I'm not saying Lawrence Group managers, because I know my people on here. The managers in general ask
Mhm.
that question to say, can I be deliberate about only hiring an influencer since we need influencers, or can I be deliberate? And so, as a Clifton Strengths coach, we know that no, we don't encourage it to be used as a tool in that way. It's really to
Mhm.
say, okay, the candidate that I love, I'm leaning into after we hire. Now let's take those strengths and see how to make the best of the position, right?
Mhm.
Because you can be in an industry or a job and it look different for different people, right? And
Mhm.
so, yes, I'm in a high influencing job as a director of talent, but it doesn't mean that a high executor can't do this job. It's just that it's going to look different. And
Mhm.
so I always encourage leaders, don't look at it as so much I need to hire influencers, or I need to hire this certain strength that's missing. No,
Mhm.
let's look at the job description, look at this person's natural strengths, and see how we can utilize those to still accomplish the needs of the position. And so that's how I would talk to organizations about utilizing that data, and the best place to address the gaps, right? Um, you know, that coaching feedback would just be, don't look at where somebody's bottom 34 are, or the bottom 30, and say, okay, you need to work on these bottom 30. Unless something happens, that is always, empathy is always going to be my number 32. It is always going to be my number 32. And so the thing is, it doesn't mean that I can't be empathetic. I
Mhm.
sometimes, and I'll get personal here. I put in my phone, encourage your husband. I have a notification that goes off every 2 weeks to just say something like sweet and nice. And so to the other side, it's like, oh, she's so empathetic. And it's like, no, I really have to try at it, but it doesn't mean that they can't do it. And so
Mhm.
that's what I would just encourage is, not too much is focusing on the gaps, but utilizing your people's strengths as best as possible to meet the needs of the team.
Yeah, and we really kind of say with Clifton Strengths, it's not if they can do the job, but how they do the job. And so you're right on the money when you're talking about we don't use Clifton Strengths for hiring. This is really a people development tool. How can we develop our people so that they can be best at their role? And you're talking a lot about how you're coaching your individuals, your managers, your people at the Lawrence Group. I'm wondering, who do you go to when you would like some coaching as the coach? Where do you go to kind of gain more information or kind of dive deeper into your own strengths?
Yeah, the person that I automatically comes to mind, I mentioned him earlier, is Dr. Peter Dry. It's funny, when he saw my full 34, he was like, whoa. He's like, okay, you're all influencing themes with some
Hmm.
strategic and then like two executors. It's like, how fast do you go? And it's funny because command and relator are in my top two, and usually one is at the bottom,
Hmm.
one is at the top. And so there's some anomalies in there that sometimes when it creeps up, I'll call Peter and say, Peter, I need your help. This is what's going on. But he's been a great resource for me. Shout out to
Awesome.
Peter.
Shout out to Peter. Perfect. Thank you. And then another thing too, when it comes to Clifton Strengths, utilizing Clifton Strengths, I know you talked about really your strategy on employee experience, employee engagement. How have you seen people utilizing their strengths, utilizing Clifton Strengths tie into the engagement, to the culture of your organization? Kind of those outcomes such as productivity, profitability, things along those lines. How have you seen that translated from utilizing and bringing in Clifton Strengths?
Absolutely. So, from an individual basis, I'll talk individual and team that
Perfect.
sticks out to me. From an individual basis, I've seen people come into my office and say, I don't know even if I'm in the right field, if I'm doing the right thing, or I think I should move and do something different. And I say, oh no, you have an all relationship building. Be the encourager on your team to have more days and work. Or
Hmm.
go and visit once a quarter somewhere else and work from somewhere else and see how that works. And it's like, oh, okay, I haven't thought about that. I just did a leadership learning series that talked about the stretch and recovery goals. Gallup
Hmm.
released a article that talked about stretch and recovery, and so we referenced that article and went through and say, okay, if I'm a relator, I'm going to be intentional about building those relationships around the organization. But and the
Hmm.
team, everybody here still makes fun of me because they know not to book me every other Tuesday after 4 o'clock. I said, but every other Tuesday after 4 o'clock is girls' night. I am
Hmm.
going out with my two friends because my relator needs it. I need
Hmm.
to lean into those relationships. That's my recovery goal. My stretch goal is working with these execs on an individual basis. My recovery is Margarita Tuesdays. And so that's a piece is like, look, you got to put that stretch and recovery. And so a lot of people, when they look at strengths, they only think of it from a professional standpoint. No, it works in
Hmm.
personal as well. And so you see that light bulb come off for an individual. For a team, so with our construction company, Integrate Construction, we did multiple team sessions with their senior leadership. And you saw how different ones say, okay, if we're looking to build relationships externally and internally, because their group makeup was mostly execution, right? Get
Hmm.
it done. But if we're looking at building relationships to grow the business, who on this team is really good at doing that? And that's how they've been using it. I mean, and I've just seen tremendous growth on their end. So it works differently
Hmm.
depending on the team and the setup and the dynamic of the team and how they fall.
Hmm.
Tyra, you mentioned it's construction, and you also you have a law firm. Those are pretty different,
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
pretty different spaces, right? When you think about introducing strengths to both, how individualized, and you've spent a little time talking about this, but across those two organizations, do you have to kind of come up with a different plan to make some of those things work? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's great. And so Lawrence Group is actually a design and architecture firm.
Okay.
And so it's funny because you have the creatives in Lawrence Group and you have the constructors. So this is a great question. I noticed that when I came into the integrate team sessions, that wall is up because they're looking at me like, oh, she's getting ready to come in here and do this kumbaya session, and I don't have time. And so I started off using my command because I knew that that's what they would lean into and appreciate the
Mm,
most. I came in and said, okay, If you think this is getting ready to be a kumbaya frou-frou session, it's not. Let's get deep. Let's talk about what's working, what's not working. What makes up a good team in your mind? What doesn't make up a good team? What are you missing? Who's not pulling their weight according to you? Using really direct language,
Mhm.
because that first session was like, let's get deep and talk. And so with the design side, especially since the makeup of Lawrence Group is mostly relationship building, it's more of a strategic language. Okay, hey, think about a team that you worked on before. What was really,
Mhm.
really good about that team? What did you like? What characteristics did you like? Think about a team that you never want to be on again. What characteristics? Okay, where does your team fall? Let's just focus on the good team. What pieces do you like, and what it's a different approach, and that's why I feel led to the most success with the construction
Mhm.
side. It was just very direct. Let's get to it. Let's get to what we need to fix, what's going good, what's not, and let's talk strategic. So yeah, it was a very different approach.
Yeah, and going off of that too, a lot of times people might say, "I don't have time to do this," or "This isn't some like." How do you make the time to have all these one-on-one conversations, and how do you really kind of go about that? Because obviously, with construction, you have a lot of frontline, you have goals to meet. How do you incorporate Clifton strengths without it feeling like something extra that they have to do on their
Yeah,
to-do list?
that is such a good question. Sometimes I have to sneak it in.
Hmm.
Now I'm telling all my secrets. If they
Yeah.
listen, I have to sneak it in, because if they come into my office, I've had some leaders that they don't really want to talk about it. And they'll come in and it's like, this is my problem. This is what I have going on. And I say, this is why. Is this person doing this? And I'm like, yeah, let's pull up their Clifton strength. You see right here. And
Yeah.
then if you start with what they're looking for as far as a solution and work backwards,
Mm.
that's how I've been able to sneak it in. And they're like, oh, well, this is more than just learning their top 5. And I'm like, yeah, it
Yeah.
solves some business problems. It creates some understanding of where they're coming from. So yeah, sometimes I have to sneak it in, starting at the solution.
I like it. We won't
Mhm.
tell them. We won't tell them that that's what you're doing. This brings up a good question from chat,
Mhm.
and Katka in watching on YouTube says, "How do you coach people that are not goal oriented in a productive way?" As an example, as someone with deliberative number 3, I find action point stressful, right? And I need time. We drive. I need some time to think about it. Should you think about those individual conversations that you have? How much pre-work do you have to do, or what do you do in advance of a coaching session to learn and know and understand that person in a way that you can work with them understanding the framework?
Yeah. So the easiest people to me have been the executors, like a achiever. That's
Mhm.
the thing, is to create a list. But like you said, when it gets to be deliberative or consistency, it's like I want to do, some of the same consistent things. It gets to be a little more difficult. Or if someone is strong strategic planning, it's
Mhm.
strategy, 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 but it's like what gets you to the goal. Number one, I say find a partner. So
Mhm.
I am not, I only have 2 little execution themes, but the talent development generalist on my team, shout out to Kiera, is 7 out of her 10 is executing.
Wow.
7 out of 10 is executing. She's a machine. So when I am like big, 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 big vision, what I did was create a relationship of transparency to say, when I am too big picture, pull me back.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm too big picture about our department goals, she has the okay to say, okay, Tyra, that's great. Can we put some goals on the board? Can we build some stair steps? And I'm like, ooh, oh, okay, great. Oh, great. What you got? Like, okay, all I know is this is where I want to be. Help me build those stair steps. So that's my accountability partner. Is saying, okay, you're really, really good at building the stair steps. I'm good at visionary and influencing people. Help me. So that's one way. And then I also say lean into your strengths and say and do and build your goals off what you're good at, right?
Mhm.
So I mentioned that article that talked about stretch versus recovery goal. If you're high strategic thinking themes, you need some days in the year that you plan on just strategically thinking about your life or your career. I
Mhm.
take off Thursday and Friday in January every year to strategically plan my personal and professional life. Just me.
Mhm.
What do I want to accomplish in my buckets? What family do I want to do? We want to do a family vacation this year. Okay, Tyra, what do you need to do to get to your ultimate goal? Have you some strategic planning sessions using that accountability partner to build some stair steps, right? And then here's the thing, everybody has all 34. It may take you longer, but just be intentional about that all 34. If you know that you actually need to build some goals, put in some of those reminders, Tyra, at least add one goal in the next 2 weeks
Mhm.
to do that and be intentional about that. So that's how I coach that feedback.
Yeah, and I think what we call that too is the power of two, finding your person that you can really work through anything. And I think that's really nice that the Lawrence group, you create that space that they can find their power of two because they all know each other's strengths. So I think opening that up and giving them the ability to kind of seek out who their power of twos are is really helpful. And another thing I was curious about, and you kind of touched on it, how do you approach coaching a manager to Clifton strengths versus coaching an individual? Because obviously, a manager is going to have a little more, or probably a lot more, responsibility when it comes to not only knowing their strengths as an individual, but as a manager and how to coach to that, or even having individual manager conversations. Kind of, what is your advice around that?
Absolutely. So I'll go back to the two. To me, this is a personal
Hmm.
opinion, not a fact. To me, achiever and responsibility are like two intense. That's an intense combo. And so somebody that has achiever responsibility, that is a entry level designer that's just pushing out work, yeah, that's gonna be great. Like they're just churning and burning. You can put it on
Hmm.
my desk. It's churning and burning. I have to coach them though to say, okay, make sure you put some recovery time in there. I talked about my talent development generalist being 7 out of 10 executing. So I'm like, go home.
Yeah.
You were here before me, and you're here a whole hour after you're supposed to be gone, 2 hours after you're supposed to be gone. I'm looking at you sending emails at night. Stop. Like, go
Hmm.
home. Whether and then with a manager that's achiever responsibility, it's a lot different, right? Because now I'm trying to coach them to delegate more.
Hmm.
And it's saying, okay, you've elevated from that doer to now a coacher or a mentor. And it's saying, okay, I know you used to do it, but go ahead and figure out how you can pass. Or how do you set expectations for that employee? Because that's usually where I see it. I know what
Hmm.
I can do as an achiever responsibility. I know how to produce this work. I trust me in what I'm bringing out. So I strap them with the right questions. Think about what you expect to see before you
Hmm.
pass it off. What would make you feel comfortable over and over again? Say, hey, I'm going to give this to you on Monday. I feel like it's adequate enough time to produce me a draft by Friday. Can you
Hmm.
do that? And making sure that they give their employees that, right? So the lean in will be completely different from a employee versus a leader.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think just knowing that, and whenever you're going into these conversations, understanding what lens you're having these conversations in can be very helpful. Even manager to manager, manager to employee, is just knowing that, okay, this is how I'm going to use this strength in this conversation, or I want to lean on this strength to talk with this person can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And so, with the Lawrence Group, what are some future? You've done so much so far with Clifton Strengths. What's next with your futuristic? What are your goals? What are your goals that you have for the future of Lawrence Group with integrating Clifton Strengths? I know when we were talking before, you've been doing cool stuff on social media, and so just kind of what's next?
Yeah, next is launching that recognizing per the strengths, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing some more um, leadership learning series around strengths. So the next three that we have up for the remainder of the year is recognizing with strengths, conflict management
Mm-hmm.
with strengths, and then performance management, just overall growth, and how to set expectations for employees or yourself per your Clifton strengths. So continuing to do that work, continuing to have them lean in. We also have the annual retreat coming up, so incorporating Clifton Strengths workshop when we have everybody here in town.
I know you haven't started it yet, but I think get a lot of questions on conflict management, conflict resolution from a strengths-based perspective. Just initial thoughts as you think about heading into that. And again, I know you're not there yet, but what are your initial thoughts on what are you thinking about how you might go about that just in a big picture kind of way?
Yeah, if I had to start with that, it first all starts with understanding. I
Mhm.
remember that there was a person, and this is how I'll start off the training, just leaning into this data and work. There was a person that I thought that their sole purpose every day was to drive me completely crazy. I
No,
was
no,
like,
that never happens. That
oh
never.
my goodness, like what is going on? When I saw their full 34, I said, "Oh my goodness." Knowing what I knew as a strength coach, I was like, "Got it. This makes complete sense. I'm relator, they're woo. All of my top five was their bottom five.
Mm-hmm.
It was like we were the complete opposite. So one, just even seeing that created a wall drop for me to say, oh no,
Mm-hmm.
no, no, no. This is this person's natural makeup. So the first part of conflict is recognizing like, is this personal? Or is this just two different
Mm-hmm.
people trying to come together to make a team and get to a solution? If it is 9 times out of 10, it's just two different people trying to work together. So now that I understand that this is how I need to approach this person, now how do I find the language in order to come to them, work together in these meetings, saying, "Hey, um, I know you first want us to go to this networking event. That's not my strong point. Um, is there a way that we can schedule these about 2 to 3 weeks in advance? I can sit with you, think about, take notes on what this networking event may be, so I can feel comfortable going into that event. And I'm not fussing that you threw it on my calendar to do
Mm-hmm.
right after work, right? So it creates that understanding, giving you tools of how to address your strengths. Like, hey, we are two completely different people. This is what I need. You get the
Mm-hmm.
best of me when, right? Using those tools, like you get the best of me when, you get the worst of me when. I want to get the best of you. You want to get the best of me. How do we come together and organize ourselves so that we can both get to the end goal without any conflict or hardly any conflict?
And you
Mm-hmm.
say best of me, and I love that question of here's what I need though in
Mm-hmm.
our relationship. And I think that's where in conflict that really starts to get to the heart of the matter is, hey, in our relationship, here's some things that I need. And it's not just one-sided need,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Both parties get the opportunity to say, once they've already positively affirmed that, hey, I'm really best when you're using me in this way, but I still need these things. And
Yeah.
I always find in those situations, that's when the conversation starts getting real, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
For
what
sure.
I need, and then things start, it starts getting people start going, "Oh, I had no idea you were looking for that." And
Mm-hmm.
when it meshes up from a strengths perspective, you're like, "Oh, I could do that all day long." What
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly. I'm going to use a analogy that when I was engaged, our counselor told us. He said, "You're an orange. He's an apple. He's never going to be an orange. You are never going to be an apple. When you get married, you better make sure that you want an apple for the rest of. Don't ever try to convert. It's always going to be that fruit. It works the same way in your professional relationships. Just understand that that's an orange. Don't try to make that person an influencer. They're not going to ever be an influencer unless something dramatically changes. Accept them for who they are. They can accept you for who you are so you can move forward together.
Yeah. And imagine if we were to have these conversations of this is what I need, this is what I bring at the start of every project, at the start of every time you get to work with somebody, just knowing that language right off the bat, I feel like can really prevent a lot of conflict because you're preventing that by talking about what you need within that person's partnership. And so with all the work you're doing, and it might be hard to pinpoint one, but what are some success or one success story that you've seen, whether that's from a coworker that you've talked to on bringing Clifton Strengths into organization? What are you most proud of? I mean, that might be hard because you've done so many great things, but what is something that kind of stands out to you of like, okay, we made a difference here from this?
Yeah, honestly, I go back to my discussion about the construction team.
Mm-hmm.
It was great that at the end of that hour and a half, they said, "Okay, can you schedule another one? We're gonna need another
Wow.
one of these." And I was like, "Okay, great." That was another hour and a half, and they're like, "Okay, let's do one more." Let's do one more. I'm like, oh, this is great. That means you're leaning in. We are getting somewhere. And that was about 4 months ago. So to see where they are now, it's just like great. Like they are working together. They are leaning into who's responsible for what, splitting up those responsibilities based off who's good at what. Has been the biggest success for me. But I also see that working in some of the other groups as well, across the
Mm-hmm.
enterprise, whether that be New and Found in Lawrence Group. We started to wrap up some groups. I just left New York working with our New York team. And so it was funny because I let them vent the first day. I was there for 2 days and I let them vent in the morning. And they kept saying, we can't get off the brown piece of paper. We sit together, we strategize and say, we're going to do all this stuff. And it doesn't happen. I pulled up their grid and all of them are majority sitting in strategic thinking. Two people with two executing things. I was like, here it is. You can't help it. You're so good at strategic thinking. You walk away and say, great, we've got this big web of ideas, and then nobody takes it on to move it forward. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's nobody's fault. It's nobody's fault. It's that you all are good at the same thing naturally. That's your natural talent at the same time. And so now that you see this grid, lean into the different people that have some executing things to move you forward. So the success is coming all around. It's really great to watch the light bulb go off for all of these people.
And it's really cool to see, even in your own examples, how Clifton Strengths is for all industries. It's for all job titles, for all types of work. And like you even said, bringing it into your personal life. So this is something that you can utilize no matter what you're doing, where you work, and who you are, which is really awesome. And for all the people listening or people that are interested in starting to bring Clifton Strengths into the organization, what is some advice you would give for those who are looking to, okay, hey, we want to launch Clifton Strengths. We don't want this to be a one-time activity. We want to become a Clifton Strengths-based culture. What advice would you have someone if they were to just ask you, what should we do? Where should we start?
Yeah. 3 things: strategy, buy-in, momentum. Strategy, buy-in, momentum. Create a plan. If you just roll it out and you're trying to wing it as you go, it gets to be difficult. People are asking, and then you'll have some people that get excited and say, okay, what's next? I did that piece, what's next? But if you have a strategy and then you create that buy-in with your leadership, because your leaders have to be bought in. They have to, but they usually want to see, okay, why is this important? Why do we need to roll this out? How can this help us solve business problems? How can this help us retain our employees? Because burnout comes from doing things that are not in your natural talents over and over again, and nobody's saying anything. You don't necessarily know the language to even speak up for yourself to say what it is. And so strategy, buy-in, and then keeping that momentum. Don't let it drop. Keep doing it. Engulf it into your organization at every stance, whether it's recruitment, whether it's engagement with your team's
Mhm.
training and development, keep it going and put it into all of your processes.
Tyra, I think one of the most important processes is to build it into your onboarding. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you've done that. What kind of
Mhm.
advice would you give to other HR leaders, other organizational leaders as they think about because I get this question a lot, where do we start? And
Mhm.
I personally am biased. I think onboarding is the place to start. Get them early, get them often, right? Just like voting in Chicago. And that is one of those things. Can you talk a little bit about any advice you'd give when you think about onboarding?
Yeah, absolutely. After we rolled out, when we got to that execution phase, every after the offer letter and before they even get in on day one, they come in, have already received a link to that exam. When we are sending
Mhm.
them, or the assessment, when we are sending them, hey, welcome to Lawrence Group, Integrate, New and Found. Here is your link. We're going to set this up, and we put it in their first week agenda. Within
Mhm.
the first week, maybe if we need to push it to week 2, they are going to do a one-on-one session around that report. Okay. Once we do that one-on-one session, I don't get throughout the end of the week before I say, hey, I just wrapped up your new hires one-on-one session. Here is their top 5. Here are the things that resonated. Here's what you should know. Okay. Your person needs that positive feedback. So don't wait 3 months
Yeah.
to congratulate them. Let's try to get a regular rotation of feedback sessions, right? So I give them advice based on that one-on-one conversation, and I'm also really transparent with the new hire, saying, "Hey, I'm going to share this with the leaders so they can make sure that
Mhm.
they get the best of you." And I even encourage them to say, "Let's do another one-on-one to see how you can get the best of your leader." Because
Mm.
that matters too. Like, hey, your leader is high execution. They don't mean to just be driving work, but this is this is how they operate, right? So that's how we've engulfed it into an onboarding process.
Olivia, I'm going to give you a shot at one more question as we kind of wrap this up. But as a follow up to that, are you doing anything to measure the success of the onboarding so that you kind of know? Because it's, you bring them on, you do all this work, you turn them over, you get them on the teams. Is there any way you're able to kind of measure, hey, is that working? Is it continually working with them? How do you feel? How do you feel about that?
That's
Mhm.
awesome. So we have a 30, 60, and 90-day onboarding survey.
Mm.
And not only is it survey, we also do an in-person follow-up to say, hey, how are things going? How are you utilizing your strengths? And then now we've added it to the performance review process.
Mm.
What are your top 5? How are they being utilized? How would you like them utilized more in the next year?
Awesome. Olivia, last question to you. One more. What's the most
Yeah.
important question you're going to ask?
I know. I'm
Oh,
like, I could just talk to Tyra all day, honestly. But I think one thing that I would maybe ask is if you could pick one, this is kind of a fun question just to end it, but if you could pick one strength that you wish that you had or that you think you find to lean on someone with, what would it be?
Oh, I wish I had analyzer.
mhm.
Mhm.
I do. I data and really analyzing data, what could go wrong? It works directly against my significance because I take risk. Um,
Mhm.
I'm like, well, and they catch things a lot more. So I do have to lean on somebody with high analytical skills
Yeah.
because I'm like, okay, well, we'll jump and we'll figure out the landing later. Let's just do it. That has worked out for me, but there are some times where I probably should have analyzed some things a little more. So I would lean on that one for
Uh,
lean on people with that.
Olivia, you guys share some themes. What would let's turn that question on you. What theme do you, and sometimes we say theme envy, right? That you
Yeah.
wish you had, Olivia.
Yeah,
What how do you answer that?
definitely. Just even with speaking with Tower Command,
Ah,
I think that I have empathy number 1, and I know you talked about you have it 32, so I think that's really where I'm like, "Oh, was I being too direct or was I" like, I don't conflict is not my favorite thing and kind of taking that action, so I love to partner with people that just say it how it is, command the room, really get that buy-in and kind of lead the pack in that way. So that's one I really envy and love to partner with. Because, for instance, I have a friend, like if there's something wrong with my meal, I'll be like, hey, can you tell the waiter that this is wrong? Or can you go ask them this question for me? And so I think having that partner in command is very helpful.
That's awesome. Olivia, take a second. Tyra, you've been a great guest, but Olivia, would you take a second and thank her for being here
Yes,
today?
thank you so much, Tyra. It has been so great getting to talk with you this afternoon and just all the advice and the expertise that you've given around bringing Clifton Strengths to your organization with all different levels of construction, architect, all that design. And it was really helpful and always a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was exciting and such a pleasure to be here. Thank you both. I really appreciate you.
You are very welcome. And Tyra, I told you it goes fast, and it always does, right? I mean, it's like all of a sudden we're
Mhm.
done. But thanks for bringing your expertise. Great to hear your story. Great to hear your background. And what it's just always great to hear, like, as you talked about these things, you just brought life to all the things that we put on paper. And so thanks for kind of
Mhm.
being a living example of this, doing it so well and paying attention in the coach's course. Yeah.
A plus.
Oh,
Absolutely.
very good. Well, thank you, Tyra. Thanks for being a part of our program today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You guys hang tight for a second. I'll remind everyone to take full advantage. If you're listening to this, full advantage of all these resources, a lot that we talked about today available now in Gallup Access. Head out to my.gallup.com and you can sign in there. If you haven't taken Clifton Strengths yet, you can purchase that and take your assessment, get a coach, and get that done as well. For coaching, master coaching, or if you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, we do that as well. Tyra mentioned that several times during the program. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Same email. Maybe you want to get your organization involved in this as well. And you're like, oh, this would be awesome. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Someone will get somebody to call you back and work your way through that. If you haven't already, you might want to join us for the 2024 Gallup at Work Summit, gallupatwork.com. And we'd love to have you here in Omaha. If it's after the fact, maybe you're listening to this in 2025 or 2026, I bet we have something for you at gallupatwork.com. Stay up to date with all the webcasts by following us on LinkedIn and in Facebook. You can find anything Clifton Strengths related on social just by searching Clifton Strengths. And thank you for joining us today. Thanks for coming out. For those, especially for those who joined us live, thanks for being here today. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.